Husband discovers wife's affair, her pregnancy by lover, and plots ultimate revenge for betrayal. Pretending to be interested in the baseball game. It was Saturday afternoon. I watched the game, but only part of the time. Whenever she wasn't looking my way, I found myself watching her. Jane is quite attractive, not necessarily stunning, but easy on the eyes. Her main feature is her curvy figure, tall with light brown hair that falls down to her shoulders. Her big brown eyes have a way of looking at you that can really make you feel something that she definitely has. We've been married for 7 years and have 2 beautiful daughters, Nancy, who is 5, and Stacy, who is 4. Since we both work full-time, my mom takes care of the girls during the day and either Jane or I pick them up from her house after work. After Stacy was born, I had a vasectomy because we felt 2 kids was enough for us, but I wasn't thinking about that now. Right now I wasn't thinking about our daughters, even though they were playing quietly in their room. I was worried about the changes I had seen in Jane over the past few months, changes like her new way of dressing and spending more time at work. And spending more time at work might not seem like a big deal individually, but collectively they were. Her behavior at home had changed as well. It often felt like she had something on her mind when we watched television. TV and I would comment on the show or movie, her reactions made it clear that she wasn't really watching. Her eyes were on the TV and she seemed to be following along, but it was obvious that her mind was elsewhere in bed at night. Even though our bed life was still quite active and happened a couple of times a week, she'd be restless for hours. Before we finally fell asleep after making love, I was sure something was bothering her, but she wouldn't open up about it. I didn't think it would be wise to ask her directly what was bothering her, for fear it would make her withdraw even more. I hoped she would come forward on her own when she was ready. We used to share everything and talk openly, so why was she keeping things to herself this time? Jane was a fantastic cook and loved to experiment with new recipes for me. She'd spent a lot of time online looking for culinary inspiration and chatting with other food enthusiasts. I even knew the nickname she used online, Jenny, a name her dad used to call her, because I saw her using it when I walked by. She chatted almost every night in a food-focused chat room, but I sensed that they were discussing. They were discussing more than just recipes, and as I watched her clear the table one night, an idea suddenly struck me: why not? I could just jump on my laptop and sneak into that cooking chat room under a fake name and see what they were talking about. Thought about pretending to be someone else and talking to her without her knowing it was me, but after thinking about it, I felt it was wrong and I couldn't bring myself to do it, especially because of the risk of her. A week passed and nothing changed. Jane was still distant. She barely noticed our daughters when they tried to get her attention at home, and I realized I had to do something. So the next day at work, I decided to spy on her chat conversations. The same chat platform she was using with the username NewMom, I chose this name to make it clear that I was pretending to be a woman, thinking it would. Jane usually joined her chat room around 8 p.m., after we had finished our p.m. after we'd put our daughters to bed, so on this Tuesday night I was ready to join her as soon as I saw her. As I made my way to the small room off the bathroom where her computer was, I stood up and told her I was going downstairs to my office to catch up on some work. She nodded in agreement, and I quickly made my way to my home office chat room and waited for her username to appear. There were already 5 other women chatting about how to make the perfect cheesecake. 5 minutes passed and I was still looking for my wife's username at the bottom of the screen. Then one of the women sent me a message asking if I had any unique cheesecake recipes. Escaped the awkward moment by saying I'd never baked one before and was there to learn from those who did, right as I was. I finished typing, Jenny appeared as the newest participant in the chat, and everyone, including Jenny, started giving me advice on baking cheesecakes, like what cheese to use and how much to use. Before long, the chat room grew to about 12 people. Since everyone was trying to chat and it was hard to keep up with the conversation, I asked Jenny to email me her cheesecake recipe. So I gave her a newly created Hotmail address just for that purpose, and the next day at work I found an email from. I was excited because I now had her email address, which was completely new to me. Surprised because my wife had never hidden anything from me before. I felt guilty for the rest of the day knowing that she would never find out that. The next day I emailed her back and told her I had tried the recipe and the cake was fantastic. The cake was fantastic and my husband loved it, and soon we were emailing back and forth and then chatting outside the cooking chat room. We added each other as friends on the chat site so we could talk at any time without having to be in the. Meanwhile, Jane's behavior at home and with me deteriorated over the next 2 weeks. Our intimate life suffered, dropping to just once a week, and it was clear that she wasn't enjoying it as much as before. It felt like she was just going through the motions, mostly staying in one position and not participating much. Still, we continued to write and chat, and I started to feel less guilty about it. Figure out what was going on to try to save our marriage. It felt like our relationship was going in a bad direction, as she was becoming increasingly distant from me and our children. It seemed that her focus on us was taking a back seat to something else on her mind. She was still a devoted mother, and I knew she'd do anything for our family, but something was clearly bothering her, and I needed to find out what it was. When I began to think she might be involved with someone else, I was ready to do whatever it took to find out the truth. Hiring a private investigator was out of the question due to lack of funds, and I couldn't spy on her at work. Since I knew little about her workplace or her colleagues, we both worked full-time, she at a large law firm and I at a large bank. We both had similar schedules, so one night during our chat I decided to get more personal. By this point, we had become comfortable with each other, and it was time for me to start digging for information. I lied and said that my name was Lucy and that I lived in Florida. She immediately mentioned that her name was Jane and that she lived in Ohio. Then she asked me, "Lucy, what do you do for a living?" Jane replied that she was a legal secretary, handling contracts and legal paperwork for the attorneys at her firm, and asked me about my job. I quickly made up that I'm not working right now because I'm on maternity leave. I'm not working right now because I'm on maternity leave, but I'm going back to work in a few weeks as a bank teller. Jane then said, "Oh, my husband also works at a bank, his name is Jack and he's a programmer there." This went better than I expected. Jane was sharing information that I already knew to be true. I was eager to ask her more personal questions, so I answered, "His name is Lawrence, and he's in insurance sales." After that, the conversation shifted to cooking and other topics, but I didn't want to overdo it. Into her personal life and work during our next chat, we didn't chat for the next 2 nights, and on the third day I emailed her to say that my bank manager had called me in for an emergency and asked me to come back a week early from vacation. Early from vacation with extra pay in cash, I expressed my excitement and anxiety about returning to work. Jane a fabricated story that I was having an affair with a coworker at the bank. Comfortable sharing secrets with her new friend by confiding in her about a made-up affair I was having, I thought. If she was being unfaithful, she'd be more inclined to talk about it at that point. "Jane, you said in your email that." "Why, Lucy, I'm not sure I should share this with you, but I just hope you won't think less of me now that you know what I did, Jane." "What happened? Did you steal from the bank, Lucy?" "No, it's nothing like that. I met a man at work named Roberto. We started out as friends and then became more, if you know what I mean." I confessed to her that I had been having an affair with this man for over a year, detailing how it started and our weekly meetings after work. Weekly meetings after work on Fridays. I mentioned that being with him was exciting and enjoyable, but that I loved my husband and didn't want this affair to destroy our marriage. My sharing this story seemed to upset Jane, as she let me continue without interruption. She let me go on for quite a while without interrupting me with questions. Downstairs room in front of her computer, perhaps pondering the pros and cons of her own situation, assuming that she had been unfaithful. Finally, she asked Lucy a question and I saw it slowly appear on my screen, "But you just had a baby. Lucy, honestly, I'm not sure who the father is, and that's why he can't find out about my affair." Next, I pretended to burst into tears. And typed that I had to leave because I was too upset to continue typing later. When I entered the kitchen, Jane was sitting in front of the TV. But it was clear that she wasn't really watching it, just lost in thought as usual. Couch, and when I took her hand she looked at me, her eyes red from crying, and after a short conversation she suggested we go to bed. Which I took as her wanting to be intimate. I was more than ready, especially since it had been a week since we had been in bed together. Week since we had last been in bed together, we were intimate and cuddled for over an hour before falling asleep in each other's arms and reflecting on our marriage. The next day at work, I wondered if it had led to us being intimate the night before. But I hadn't learned anything new from her. I figured I first needed to create a trusting atmosphere so that Jane would feel comfortable. Sharing secrets with her friend Lucy, especially now that she believed Lucy had a secret too, Jane. And Lucy didn't communicate over the weekend, but on Monday I emailed Jane from work, pretending to be excited about with Roberto, the first conversation I had had with him in 3 months. After the kids went to bed that night, I went to my office in the basement, logged on to my computer, and waited for Jane to come online for our chat. "I'm so excited to chat with you tonight, I have some good news," I began, ready to share it with Jane. Jane replied, acknowledging my email and joking that she could guess why I was in such a good mood. He was so excited to finally talk to me again, and I could tell he still had feelings for me, which made me really happy. I shared, "But if he really cared, why didn't he call or try to meet with you for the past 3 months, she asked. Lucy calling was not an option because I think Lauren started to suspect something and I'm almost sure he's monitoring our home phone. Checking my cell phone is easy for him when he looks at the bill, I explained to Jane, "But why? Didn't you meet him at a motel like you used to when you were working?" she asked Lucy. "I was pregnant and didn't feel good about my appearance, plus I doubt Roberto would want to be with someone who was pregnant," I replied. We continued the conversation for another 30 minutes, and I could sense that Jane was not impressed with the fictional Roberto I was describing. Wanted to highlight the negative aspects of infidelity by portraying Roberto as a narcissistic, stereotypical cheater. And Lucy didn't chat on Tuesday, but we chatted again on Wednesday. During this chat, Jane opened up about her own struggles over the past few months. And that's when I discovered that she was actually seeing someone else, a lawyer who was also her boss. The man's name was Jason Weldon, and he was a married lawyer with a child who also happened to be her boss. I had heard Jane mention Jason a few times before, but she hadn't mentioned his name at all in the last few months. Relationship began nearly a year ago during a trip to Atlanta for a convention, a detail Jane left out when she told me about the trip, she led me to believe that she was traveling with another secretary, making it seem as if they were. She justified the trip by saying it would look good on her performance review and could help her get a raise. Jane told Lucy that on her first night in Atlanta, she and her boss had drinks in the hotel lounge after a group dinner. In the hotel lounge, the evening continued with an invitation to his room for more wine, which eventually led to intimate moments. Intimate moments, despite the initial regret and guilt she felt after their first encounter. Repeating the experience the next night in his room and reading my wife's confession left me completely devastated. I was shocked. I could not understand how she could betray our family like this. She was not just having an affair with this guy. Once she did it twice, and the second time she even spent the whole night with him. To explore her current situation with her boss, and she shared everything openly. Here's the gist of it. After returning from the convention, she felt terrible and stayed away from him for a few weeks, but eventually gave in to his persistent pursuit. At first, they were discreet, using his office after hours. But then they began using a room at the Hilton for their weekly trysts, and also sneaking into his office a few times a week. The anger I felt when I read her confession was indescribable. From violently confronting her, but as my anger cooled, a desire for revenge took its place. Was irreparable, and my only focus was to make her pay for the damage she had done to our relationship. Inquired if she had feelings for Jason Wellen, her answer was immediate and unequivocal: she did not love him. She professed a greater love for her husband, but admitted that the physical connection with Jason was irresistible, likening it to an addiction. She confessed that the affair had been going on for over a year, with their encounters occurring 3 to 4 times a week. More often than she was intimate with me, I remembered all the times I really wanted to be intimate with her. But she always had some reason to avoid it, but from what she told Lucy, she always seemed willing and excited to be with him. She was sharing something with him that should have been exclusive to our relationship. Like I was paying the price while he enjoyed her without restraint. No wonder I had sensed a change in her behavior. For a while, as I thought about it, I thought she might be planning to leave me for Jason, but considering he was married with a child, I wondered if he was really in love with my wife, if he saw her as a better match, or if the thrill of the affair was what was really appealing. After talking to Jane for over an hour, I felt completely drained. Many questions remained unanswered, but I needed time to process everything I had discovered, so I excused myself. Baby needed me and promised we'd talk again in a day or two before I said goodbye. What should a man do when he finds out that his life is falling apart, when he finds out that his wife is not only his wife, but that she is often involved with another man? With another man, when he hears from her that being with this man is an addictive pleasure. Something she feels she can't give up. Sure, she claimed to love me more than anything, but how could I overlook the fact that she's repeatedly? How is it possible for her to love our daughters and me while betraying us? She was caught up in a world of desire. While I was trapped in my own world of suffering, torment, and neglect, I was determined to make her suffer for the damage she had done to our family. The ultimate punishment I could think of was to take her daughters away from her. I planned to divorce her and fight for full custody of our girls. To get full custody of our girls for her, losing them would be the most devastating outcome I could then achieve. Move to another state to make it harder for her to see them and make her life a nightmare. Jason's wife about the affair and consider legal action against her workplace for contributing to the ruin of my marriage. But my first step was to gather evidence of her affair with Jason while pretending everything was normal around her. She became incredibly difficult after I discovered the affair, but she was too wrapped up in her secret life to notice my desperation. So for Jane, life continued much as it had for the past year. It had been 2 days since she had last communicated with Lucy. I emailed her that morning, pretending to be Lucy, to see if she was available for a chat that evening. In the evening she replied affirmatively and planned to meet at her regular time. I had a list of questions ready for her. I knew her answers would hurt, but I needed to understand her feelings for Jason and her future intentions. My computer, ready to chat before the kids were even asleep, and greeted her as soon as she logged on. Lucy, I've been thinking about our last conversation non-stop. Jane said, I hope my last words didn't upset you too much. I hope my previous words didn't upset you too much or make you think badly of me. Lucy, who am I to judge you? We're both only human, after all, and being able to talk about it with you has really helped me. I don't have anyone else who understands what I'm going through. I usually share everything with my husband. Do you think your husband has any idea what's going on? Lucy, no, he doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me completely. If he found out, he'd lose it. He can get pretty intense and I don't want to upset him. Got a vasectomy after your youngest was born. Aren't you afraid that Jason might get you pregnant? That's because I've been on birth control pills for over a year, ever since things started with Jason. You have to keep those pills hidden, right? He can't know you're on them. Lucy, yeah, they're stashed safely. I have a 3-month supply hidden in a 3-month supply hidden in a shoebox in my bedroom, and I take my pill every morning while he's in the shower. My wife enjoyed telling her girlfriend how she managed to cheat on me. She seemed to take pleasure in making me look foolish, but I was preparing to confront her with an important question. Lucy, that's not going to happen. I really love my husband and I have no feelings for Jason. Jason. The closeness with Jason is exciting, but it's just that there's no love, so I'm so torn. I want to keep seeing Jason, but I don't want my husband to find out that you're trying to have the best of both worlds. Do you really think your husband won't eventually find out that he's not? Jason and I are very careful, and Jason has his own marriage to worry about. He'd be in big trouble if his wife found out about our affair. Is Jason better in bed than your husband? My husband is a great lover, but Jason is different. Different, the thrill and risk of getting caught enhances it for me, and yes, Jason is slightly taller, but it doesn't really change things with my husband. With my husband, it's making love, but with Jason, it's just being close, you know what I mean? Was appalled at how lightly my wife talked about her affair, treating it almost like a casual game that I had to figure out. If she understood the pain and damage she was doing to our daughters and to me with her mind often consumed by her lover. Avoiding detection, risking the dynamic with Lucy, I pushed, aren't you neglecting your husband? He must feel. Feeling left out because of your affair, she finally replied after a long silence. We still have intimate moments, it's less frequent, but I don't. I think he knows he loves me deeply, and besides, I can't be intimate with him right after being with Jason. Aren't you worried that with the lack of attention at home, he might seek affection elsewhere? Now you've got me worried. I didn't mean to scare you, but it's something to consider. As the conversation moved on to other topics before ending, my wife excitedly told Lucy about a trip she was planning. To Atlanta with Jason in a few weeks, a trip she hadn't mentioned to me that night as we both struggled to fall asleep. As I fell asleep, I decided not to make a move on my wife that night, and she didn't seem interested either. I was able to fall asleep and noticed that Jane was struggling as well, so I decided to talk to her the next day. Saturday, hoping to possibly save our marriage, I broached the subject as we sat at the kitchen table the next morning. Jane, have you noticed that our intimacy has really declined in the last few months? It's been almost 2 weeks since we've been together. What's going on? Are you seeing someone else? She paused her fork in midair, clearly taken aback by my blunt question. That was a first in our 7 years of marriage. You've got a lot of nerve confronting me like that, she replied. Jane usually calls me Jake, but resorting to Jack means she's upset or trying to make a point. How dare you question my loyalty after all these years of juggling work and home? For our physical relationship to cool off a bit over time, I think it's unfair for you to even suggest such a thing. I'm not accusing you of anything, Jane, but you've changed a lot in the past year, and even our daughters can tell. They hardly ever come to you with their problems, they come to me. Realize that it was useless to try to discuss our problems any further. We only have 24 hours a day, and I can't always be there to meet our children's every need. It was also clear from her sudden change of expression that she hadn't fully considered her words before. Calling her own children brats is not something a caring mother would do, and she seemed to realize her mistake. But the damage was done, she couldn't undo what she had said, and her expression changed from anger to distress. It became clear to me that any attempt at conversation was often futile. People resort to tears to escape a conversation that isn't going their way, so I dropped the subject for the time being. Since it was Saturday afternoon and Jane was shopping, a routine for her every week, I guessed she was probably looking for something new. Something new to wear for her trip to Atlanta with Jason, so while she was out and the kids were busy in their room, I decided to search our. It took me about 15 minutes, but I found them in her closet. Just as she had described to Lucy, hidden in a shoebox with a pair of shoes, the pills were in a plastic case and there were 2 more sealed packs. Were 2 more sealed packets in the box, indicating that she had been taking them for a year, probably starting around the time her. I had a vasectomy, she would have no explanation for a pregnancy other than admitting to the affair. A mixture of sadness, anger, and pity washed over me at that moment. Wasn't the loving woman I married 7 years ago, where had the woman gone who used to care so much for me? As I held the pill dispenser, I thought about the future of our family and what this would mean for our daughters. I realized that my marriage was over, but I was certain that I couldn't leave my daughter. Under her sole care, tears overwhelmed me as I sat on our bed, clutching the open pill box. Followed by a strong desire for revenge against both my wife and her lover. It was a harmful plan, far from anything a kind-hearted person would do. Anything a kind-hearted person would consider, but my heart had no room for mercy or forgiveness. Bitterness and anger had consumed me. I carefully removed a pill from the case, then took my daughters to my mother's house before heading to a. Before going to the pharmacy, I spent half an hour looking through the case for exactly what I needed, and I finally selected 2 types of white round pills, similar in size to my wife's birth control pills. Bottle indicated that the pills were for liver problems, while the other was baby aspirin. The new pills with one from my wife's pack at home, the baby aspirin pill fit perfectly into the dispenser, although it was a little thicker. I proceeded to replace all the pills in the current pack with the ones I had purchased. After putting everything back in place, I went to pick up my daughters, hoping they wouldn't mention the visit to their grandmother's when my wife got home, but I did. Had already come up with an excuse for why they were there, just in case life went on, and the next Tuesday Jane mentioned that she was going to another conference in Atlanta for a few days with a secretary from her office, though she didn't specify who, and while she was gone she didn't call us even once. Our daughters didn't seem to miss her, but I did. The day after she left, I used a pay phone to call her work and asked for Jason Weldon. Jason Weldon, only to find out that he was also out of town and expected back the following week. Probably with Jane, who greeted me with a hug upon her return. That evening, after we put our daughters to bed, she led me to our bedroom and we were intimate for nearly 2 hours. Wondered if her actions were an attempt to make up for not calling or if she felt guilty about her time with Jason. Perhaps she was trying to make amends for her earlier harsh words about our daughters by physically connecting with me. It seems she was trying to. By offering herself to me, treating intimacy as a favor rather than a shared aspect of our marriage. Over the past year, it has felt like Jason has become her priority, pushing me out of her life, although she may not have fully realized the extent of her actions. Her behavior made me feel like a second option compared to Jason, despite everything. I thoroughly enjoyed being close to her that night. It felt rejuvenating, like a much-needed breath of fresh air. For me, being intimate with Jane was always amazing, and despite my love for her, I still wanted to get even with her. Somehow, Jane and my fictional persona, Lucy, continued their bi-weekly conversations. During these talks, I pretended to rekindle a relationship with an imaginary Roberto by telling fabricated stories about our encounters. To provoke Jane into revealing her own experiences with Jason, this strategy was my way of uncovering. Shockingly, I found out that she was doing things with Jason that she'd never done before. Since I was heartbroken, her actions contradicted her claims that she loved me more than anything. Understand how she could profess such love while treating me with increasing neglect and indifference despite changing her birth control pills. I continued to monitor the supply to see if she was still using them, noticing a daily decrease as she used up a dispenser. I would replace the pills with the new one she had started. A few weeks later, I noticed a change in Jane. She became more attentive to me and our daughters, and showed more warmth and presence at home. After her trip to Atlanta, she came home visibly upset. One afternoon, when I inquired about her distress, she burst into tears and retreated. To her room, although I suspected the cause of her upset when I found out that she hadn't taken her birth control pills for the last 2 days. It was confirmed that Jane was pregnant. As soon as I could, I swapped the aspirin I had placed in the dispenser for the real birth control pills I had kept in my purse. I did this just in case she tried to return the pills and complained that they were not working as expected. Didn't work as expected, things were starting to escalate, and I anticipated that it wouldn't be long before the consequences of her 15-month affair would begin to take their toll on her. Were not worth the anguish and pain to come, despite my attempts to get her to talk about what was bothering her. She would not admit to her affair or her pregnancy, and even if she had, I would still have filed for divorce and fought for sole custody. Of our daughters, but it would have stopped my quest for revenge right there. She continued to deceive me, even with a child that wasn't mine growing inside of her, and I wasn't ready to reveal that I knew about her affair while she was pregnant. I needed more proof of her infidelity, as I was planning to sue her employer for. It had been a few weeks since Jane had last spoken to Lucy, just before she left for her trip to Atlanta, and I was curious if she would share the news of her pregnancy with her fictional friend. As soon as I noticed her getting on her computer after we put the kids to bed, I rushed down to the basement to get started. Chatting with her online, she shared details about her trip to Atlanta, even bragging to Lucy about how much she enjoyed. She confessed that they had spent much of those nights being intimate on a whim. I questioned her willingness to leave her husband for Jason. Wife insisted that she would never leave me because she loved me, clarifying that her relationship with Jason was purely physical with no. What shocked me even more was her claim that she wanted to end her affair with Jason and return to being a devoted wife to me, yet she omitted any mention of her pregnancy. If she thought we could just go back to the way things were before her infidelity, she was in for a shock. For over a year she had been intimately involved with Jason, denying me the affection that should have been mine by now. On a Friday night, she confessed to Lucy that she was pregnant with Jason's child and that they planned to go to a private clinic for an abortion. She detailed her plan to travel to a clinic in Red River in 2 weeks with the goal of staying there for a few days after the procedure. I documented everything she said so I could use it against her later the next day. I took time off work to drive to Red River, an hour away, and posed as Jan's husband. Confirmed her appointment at the clinic for the abortion on the 14th. I also learned the name of the doctor who was scheduled to perform the procedure a week later, Dr. Keith Miller. As we all sat down to dinner, Jane told me that she had to stay in Atlanta for another important conference. She also mentioned that this would be her last business trip. I was less than thrilled. I knew the real reason for her trip, and she seemed surprised by my lackluster reaction to her announcement. I was already aware that her affair was ending, which probably explained her decision to stop attending. However, by this time it was far too late for any chance of reconciliation on my part. Wednesday the 14th, and watched as Jane left early that morning, kissed me goodbye, and drove off to the airport in her Toyota. After she left, I drove to Red River myself, planning to leave her there and continue on to Red River with Jason. I parked in front of the clinic with a clear view of the entrance, and when they arrived I was able to get clear pictures of them. We entered the clinic together, and after making sure they were inside, I left to avoid being spotted until the afternoon of the 16th. By the afternoon of the 16th I was already home, having secretly taken 2 weeks off from work. Surprised to find me there so early, I had everything in place by the time Jane left for Red River. I had met with my attorney and later visited the company where Jane worked to speak with Ronald Ross, the president of the company. The entire situation to him, detailing my wife's affair with Jason Wellen, including her pregnancy and her to a clinic in Red River for an abortion. I mentioned my plans to divorce her and sue both Jason for ruining our marriage and the Jason for destroying our marriage and the firm for failing to maintain professional boundaries between boss and employee. To take this matter to court, armed with solid evidence, including photos of Jason and my wife at the clinic, understanding that the potential for negative publicity for the firm, he requested a day to consult with his team, which they conducted. Their due diligence, interviewing other secretaries and verifying my claims with the after discussions, we reached an settlement of $500,000 to avoid a lawsuit against the firm. In addition, Jason and my wife were to be terminated from their positions. However, considering my wife's role as the mother of our children and not wanting her to struggle financially or go on welfare, I negotiated for her to receive her salary for another year and to have her counseling and medical expenses for the next 5 years. We came to an agreement, and after extensive discussions between my lawyer and hers, the necessary documents were drawn up and signed by me. Then a check was made out to my lawyer. My lawyer dated it for after my divorce was final, to make sure my wife couldn't claim any of it. Jane, who had already obtained a restraining order in the divorce papers to prevent her from coming near our home or our daughters during the divorce proceedings. I warned her in a letter attached to the divorce papers that if I would pursue full custody of our daughters in court, ensuring that she would lose all access to them. When Jane returned home the next day, unaware of her impending divorce and job loss until possibly Monday, I was there. "Jack, why are you home so early? And why didn't you pick up the girls first?" I explained that I took the day off because we needed to talk, which is why I hadn't picked up our daughters. "What was so urgent that you had to take the day off?" she asked, and I told her about something I had discovered a few days ago. I told her that a few weeks ago, while fixing a light in our walk-in closet, I had made a discovery that caused a box to fall and reveal its contents. Box of birth control pills on the living room table, and asked for an explanation. The overnight bag she was carrying fell to the floor as her face turned pale, briefly showing a look of shock before it quickly changed. It changed quickly as she suddenly screamed and panicked, oh God, no, this can't be happening." She had to sit on the arm of the couch because her leg couldn't hold her up anymore, her body swaying back and forth. She was sitting there with her hands covering her face, looking really pathetic. "So, my faithful wife," I continued, "can you explain these pills? Why are you afraid of getting pregnant when you know I had a vasectomy?" "I had a vasectomy after our second child, unless of course you've been an unfaithful Jack." "Listen, please, I can explain. You're making this seem a lot worse than it is, just hear me out," she pleaded, her face full of worry and fear. Her lips quivering and her hands shaking, her eyes watery and pleading. Despite her pleas, I continued to confront her. "You've been unfaithful for who knows how long, and now you think you can just explain away all the deception. I don't love him, Jack, it's over. I've always loved you, we need to talk. There has to be a way to fix this," she pleaded, tears staining her blouse, her eyes red and swollen from stress and emotion. "How can you claim to love me when you've had an affair, when you've broken our marriage vows, when you've betrayed me? I hope you can understand, Jack, this happened out of the blue, and there was never any love involved. There was never any love involved. Yes, we definitely need to talk. You owe me a thorough explanation." The shock on her face could not have been greater if I had physically hit her. She stared at me speechless, her mouth agape, her eyes filled with fear. She tried to speak, but no clear words came out. "Yes, Jane, I am fully aware of the Red River trip and the real reason you went there. Would you care to fill me in on any details I may be missing?" I stood there debating whether to follow her, afraid she might hurt herself, but I found myself unable to check on her. She remained in her room for 2 hours, finally taking a shower after a long period of crying. When she emerged in her long robe, the toll of her emotions was evident on her face, which bore the mark of deep suffering. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table, without meeting my gaze, she asked, "Jack, what are you going to do? I don't want to lose you, I'll do anything to make it right, but I think it's a little late for that." I replied, "Remember the months I spent trying to reach you, how much I wanted to be close to you. I would have done anything you asked. But you reserved yourself for your affair, denying me what was rightfully mine. Jane, now there's hardly anything left." She's collapsed again, her head buried in her arms on the table. "Forgive me, Jack, please tell me you still love me," she begged. In that moment, a part of me wanted to comfort her. In spite of everything, my love for her was as strong as ever, but I knew Acknowledging that it would be a mistake, I insisted in a calm voice that she reveal everything, the identity of her lover, how they met. She finally told me everything, and I believed her because what she told me matched what I already knew. She admitted to her abortion in Red River and confessed to being intimate with Jason. Several times a week, including meetings at his office and weekly motel meetings, we barely spoke for the rest of the weekend. And on Monday morning she received divorce papers at her office. The company president informed her and Jason that they were being terminated because of the restraining order. Could not return home, but she called me at noon, completely devastated, and before I ended the call, I told her that I would send her clothes to her mother's house since she had no reason to come to our house, and I changed all the locks. Found out later that she had a breakdown and was hospitalized right after our conversation. She was at her mother's when she called and her mother had to call an ambulance. 2 weeks later she agreed to the terms of the divorce I had arranged for her. To visit our daughters at my mother's house for a few hours on Saturdays. 6 months later, our marriage was officially over. Her mother told me that she was deeply depressed, in therapy, had lost a lot of weight, and barely left the house since losing her job. Since losing her job, I allowed her more access to our daughters over time, even unsupervised visits and weekends at her mother's house. I noticed the girls growing closer to their mother and saw potential. Challenges. A year after the divorce, my mother's cancer diagnosis meant she couldn't care for the girls during work hours. I reached out to Jane and offered to take on the role of caring for our daughters during my work hours. Is this really a practical idea? Your parents' house is almost 30 meters away and the daily commute could be too much for the children. Exhausting for the kids, and I don't want our daughters to get the wrong impression that we might be reconciling. I could tell that my words might hurt her, but she didn't visibly react to my refusal or the implication behind it. Her suggestion directly acknowledged my own inability to provide full-time care for our daughters and my financial constraints. However, a few weeks later, a settlement from Jane's former employer provided me with enough money to hire a nanny. For the girls a year into the future. Widow with no children of her own, whom my daughters adore and have embraced as a maternal figure. From Jane, who limited our interactions to times when she visited the girls.